I had a realization recently that the type of photography I've been pursuing really doesn't hold much interest for me anymore. I enjoy the process of making pictures, but the subject matter is leaving me feeling disconnected and, frankly, disappointed with the pictures I am making. I was talking about it the other day with my friend John, and he asked me how the work I want to create differs from the work that I think I should create. And it turns out that answering that question wasn't as easy as I'd thought, because before you decide on the what, you first need to know the why. I'm Jeffrey Sidoris. I'm talking to Jon Wilkening, and this is In Between.
Seth Godin always talks about writing every day and sort of committing to writing or even posting every day, because that forces you to look around for things that are worth comment.
Mm-hmm.
And he's like, obviously there's, some things are going to be better than others.
Sure.
You're never going to have like the perfect amount, perfect quality all the way through.
Right.
Do you find with like a weekly photography show that principle applied there as well?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I didn't just show up and do the show on Tuesday. I mean, I started after recording that Tuesday. I'm already kind of on the lookout and adding things to my own notes to then kind of cull through and add to the show notes during the course of the week for the next episode.
Has that thing, or has that muscle been redirected in other places, or is it just sort of set down, if you want to say?
I think it's half and half. I mean, I still have a notes file, and not a notes file. I save things to Pocket to use as links in iterations. But just posting a link is different than having a discussion, even if it's a brief discussion about an item or a topic, and that's the part that I kind of miss, is the discourse around something, rather than just going, hey, I found this thing and here's this cool link that I thought you might like. I mean, that feels, I love doing it because I do still look around for things, but it's not as satisfying as having a brief or even a long discussion about something.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. It's something where like, I put out, every Monday morning I send out the newsletter that has like 8 to 10 links.
Mm-hmm.
But like, I think looking at that, I've done that for so long. It'd be really fun to have a interaction where it's like, this is what I found, and then you get that play of like feedback of like, oh, that reminds me of this,
right,
to that,
and that's exactly what I'm talking about. That's what I miss, the discussion around it that's more than just me sitting at my computer and then hitting the share button.
Yeah.
Yeah. I still, don't get me wrong. Like I said, I like it. And in fact, I haven't done, I'd have to look back on it, but I don't remember when the last newsletter was that I put out. I ended up just kind of stopping them for some reason. I didn't ask anybody whether they would prefer, the audio versions or whether anybody still enjoyed it. But for some reason, I just stopped doing it. And I think I was kind of reflecting on it a couple days ago, and it felt strange to release a printed version of the podcast, or a podcast version of the print, however you want to look at it. It just felt strange releasing the same thing virtually verbatim in two different formats. But maybe there's value there. Maybe that is the value, is that it's two different formats.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know. My initial assumption would be that the audio version would do better,
mm-hmm.
simply because it it allows people to consume it in multiple different ways and
Right.
time periods.
Right.
But then again, maybe part of the value is being able to someone valuing it enough to sit down and actually go through it.
Right.
Right.
And I don't know that I'm sure there's a way to do it, but I haven't tracked whether people click through in the links in the show notes the same way I could track, the opens and click throughs in the newsletter. So I don't know if one is more engaging than the other, because I haven't really looked at. I don't even know if there's a way to. I'm sure there is, but I haven't looked into if there's a way to track, click throughs in podcast show notes. Is that in the normal metrics that are measured? I don't know.
Yeah, I'm not. I wouldn't know. I don't know off the top of my head.
But that kind of, that question is part of what I've been thinking about for the last, I don't know, what was it, a couple weeks ago when we first talked about the idea of something like doing what you want to do versus doing what you think you should. Was that what it was?
Oh, yes.
What's the work that you want to create versus the work you think you should create?
Yeah, because like that question popped in my head because, there's definitely, I've definitely felt it in like my own work, in that I look around at, if you want to say, the popular expressions of photography.
Mm-hmm.
Look around at the Instagram stars, like everything that's getting attention.
Mm-hmm.
And that work is very different than the work I'm creating.
What do you see? What? Sorry to interrupt you, but what is that you see? What is the work that's getting attention in what comes up in your feed? Because I think people would be interested in hearing how that compares to what they might feel is getting the attention, or is the the popular work of the day.
Yeah, no, there's definitely there's layers to it, in that you have on one level, like on a larger scale, you have the classic sort of, I don't mean to sound negative, but the pretty picture of the pretty place.
Mm-hmm.
The gorgeous sunrises and or sunsets.
So would you call it travel? What I mean is if you had to pin it to a genre, is there a particular genre that fits in that seems to be more popular or more prevalent than another?
The travel lifestyle genre seems to. I think when Instagram sort of hit, those photographers seem to explode on Instagram faster than a lot of the other genres did. And I don't really know why.
Do you remember back in the day when Bill and I talked about Instagram? We're like, it's never going to go anywhere.
Trust me,
and that's why I'm not an entrepreneur.
If my old version of me, who made fun of Twitter, would see how much I'm on Twitter,
right,
he'd be so disappointed.
Right. We were well off the curve on that one.
That's being kind to say we're well off the curve. But like, so that's on one layer, that's the sort of the work that's exploded. On a secondary level, in terms of what I've almost more curated, my feed tends to be a lot of more classic street photography, work, some real, like, if you want to say, I'm happy with the work that I've curated, the feed I've curated, but like, and a lot of that work has influenced my eye in sort of my understanding of photography. But like, when I look on Instagram, I don't see the work I'm creating.
You don't see the
And
type of work that
yeah,
you're creating.
no.
Yeah. Is it that it's not out there, or is it that the algorithm hasn't sort of let it through when you've liked similar work, or is there nothing similar out there?
To be honest, I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
The sort of, and part of it is the sort of as a impressionistic street photography.
Right. Which is how
know,
you describe yourself.
yeah,
Yeah.
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 That's not work that plays well in couple second scroll bys, if you want to say.
Right. Yeah. You've got to
It,
look a little deeper to see what's happening.
yeah, at first glance it looks like a bad accident.
Yeah. Well, here's what not to do, kids.
Yeah, like it looks like someone you're like, oh, you were just publishing everything you took that day, and
Right.
this is what happened to
Right.
me. But if you want to go back to the initial discussion, part of while I was creating a lot of that impressionistic work, there's definitely a part of me that was like, should I focus my efforts more on things that I see in and around me
Mm-hmm.
in order to to advance farther than I currently have, if that makes sense.
So it would be purely a strategic decision to try and not game the system, but to try and reach more people to get them to either like or follow. Yeah.
You're like, it's one of those where it's like you see these certain things being more popular or more widely shared,
Mm-hmm.
and you're like, can I contribute to that stream versus it, and sort of join that discussion, or is it worth it to just continue to make work by myself?
Mm-hmm.
So,
To see, yeah, and really, there's no way to know what would have worked better.
no, absolutely not. But it's the question sort of leads to this, at least in my head, it leads to this notion of like, is the work we create a deliberate choice, or is it something deeper that has to come out?
Does it have to be one or the other?
Probably not.
Yeah. I mean, I hit a wall when we were in Savannah. I made this realization. It was like a light went on. I made the realization straight up that I just don't like street photography.
Mm-hmm.
Not that I don't like looking at it. That's not it. It's purely from the making. It's the expectation on some level. The expectation of street photography is, at least in a certain segment. And I'm not intending to throw street photography as an entire genre under the bus, but there is that street photography sort of trope of, find shaft of light, wait for person to walk through shaft of light, take photo.
Yeah.
Or find steamy window, wait for person on the other side of steamy window to walk close enough to steamy window, take photo.
Yeah. I find it sometimes hard. Like when I because if I look at look at my scans or my negatives,
mm-hmm.
you will find that person who walks into the shaft of light photo, and one of those things where I like that aesthetic.
Mm-hmm. So why don't you release it? Why don't you share those? Is it because it's expected?
I think I just don't connect with them as much.
So you can see them aesthetically, but they don't do much for you emotionally, it sounds like.
Yeah. What you do see is when I've taken that shaft of light, or the light in when you're like in large cities like Philadelphia, when you get the sun basically going through the skyscrapers to where you have like 6 feet of light. I've done those photos in the more impressionistic style, and I've released those because they hit on that idea, but they're more mine.
Right. Right.
You know.
So you've figured out on some level, you have figured out a way to shoot what you should shoot, those images that resonate, but you shoot them through your sort of grid, your filter, and something unique comes out the other side. So you're still you're on the same playing field, but you're playing a different sport.
Yeah. Yeah, no, absolutely. And it's something where, like, when you're talking about sort of your feelings on street photography, it made sense mentally with what I know, who I know you to be, in that street photography to me often feels like an isolated, lonely type pursuit.
Right.
Someone who is in the city but removed from the city enough to notice it. But anytime I'm with you in the city, you were getting to know the people in the lives of those you interact with on a level that's very different than I think how most street photographers approach it. So when you talked about like your feelings on street photography, it made sense to where that question of, like, in some ways, where what you're supposed to shoot versus I forget even how I phrase it now, but like that question, like, you have a certain personality that in essence you could argue makes it harder for you to shoot street photography.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's true because it lacks connection.
It doesn't check the box that you need it to check. Right.
Now, I will say an exception to that is the type of street photography that Martin Rotz shoots, where it is an appreciation and almost a relationship that he has developed with form, with texture, with color. There's a purity of line and shape that goes on that transcends, on some level, transcends the need to connect to that subject because it's so impersonal already, you know? Whereas if I'm shooting and there's a person in the frame, I feel removed enough from that person. If there's no interaction, if there's no sort of connection or even a brief conversation, I feel removed enough from that situation that it's not very pleasant as an experience.
Mm-hmm. Do you think that's because if you want to look at it, his street photography now has moved away from that impersonal and almost into the graphic design?
Sure.
And which then, if you want to say, checks another box of your personality wheel.
Yeah.
You know, the thing, like something that you resonate with.
Right.
So that it moves away from this area where you have a problem, and then you're like, oh, okay.
Here's something I can connect to.
Yeah.
Yeah. And Chris does the same thing with his work, you know, especially some of the work that he did. Remember the like the crosswalks where it was like he crushed the blacks of the street and just had the very graphic paint. That was fantastic work. And I could look at that and appreciate it not only from a viewer's perspective, but what it must have felt like to see those scenes, not through the viewfinder because Chris doesn't use his viewfinder anymore, but on the back of the camera, you know, to see those scenes emerge and go, oh man, nailed it. You know, that I connected to in a very different way. And I think to the point you just made of it leaves the realm of personal, and in the impersonal, I can connect to it on a different level. Mm-hmm. And I wonder how many other people are kind of like shooting through the wrong lens as it is, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. And how many people are, if you want to say, denying the thing that's bumping around in their head, or like denying elements to what they like in pursuit of something else.
is there a commercial component to it, in your opinion? I mean, I would imagine, I mean, I've tried to sell prints and prints just aren't my bag. I mean, that's the people that look at my work, at least so far, the photographic work I'm talking about. I think the paintings are going to be, that's a different thing.
Mm-hmm.
But I think it feels like a lot of photographers on Instagram shoot with the intent of selling prints.
Yeah.
Rather
I
than
can see
shooting and then going, oh, you know what? This would make a really killer print. It's almost like they're asking what would make a killer print beforehand. They've pre-sold the product. You know what I mean?
that. Yeah. No, I think that's definitely a driver. I mean, you could argue that, back to the like travel and lifestyle photography, that is often one of the easier means to commercialize
Right.
one's work.
Well, how many, I mean, gosh, you and I've talked about this. How many of the landscape photographers are out there shooting and doing calendars? It's inexpensive to produce. And if they hit the right note, you can sell potentially thousands of copies. And you've already done the work, over the course of the year. There's work in the assembly of it, but it seems like a great return if you can find that market that clicks with your work.
Yeah, I'm just thinking of I know of one of the bigger Instagram. You're familiar with Sam Elkins?
Mm-mm.
I forget how many Instagram followers he has, but basically I found him because he was on YouTube doing these videos of how he does what he does.
Mm-hmm. In terms of shooting or processing or both?
All the above.
All of the above, yeah.
Yeah. And I know it's one of those where he went to, he has 753,000 followers. And
Wow.
He's taken his work and then pitched it to brands to do, lookbooks and that sort of stuff for it.
Wow.
Where if you want to say, if you look back to his earlier work, it was far more Instagram cliches, if you want to say. And at some point it took a turn and went to, and part of it was Sam was a very young guy when he first started. He sort of blew up on Instagram. So that has definitely a factor to it. But then it's interesting that he took that and parlayed that into a more commercial career because of that.
I wonder what was the change. What was there a specific image or maybe a specific sequence of images that got more response, and that kind of signaled a change in direction, or was he already making that right turn and it just happened to catch on? What came first, I wonder.
Yeah, I don't know. Do you think Instagram as a platform has become a function that is almost like a creative rudder to photographers? In that you post an image, it gets a certain number of likes, and you post a different image and it gets it becomes a quantitative response system. And so then, whether consciously or subconsciously, you then change what you shoot based off of the numbers that you get.
I think there's certainly the possibility of that. Yeah. I mean, look, if I were going off of numbers, if I just said, okay, look at your work and do the stuff that gets the most sort of likes, I'd be doing nothing but self-portraits, because the self-portrait that I posted a couple weeks ago has, I think it's if it's not the top, it's in the top 5 of most liked photos I've ever posted.
Mm-hmm.
But you know what I don't want to do is start posting self-portraits every week, because I find them painful. So that's actually an interesting kind of metric where, And who knows why people liked it? Was it the photograph? Was it the explanation behind it? Was it a combination of both? Was it the fact that I wrote something about it and bared a little bit of my discomfort, and by doing that resonated? I don't know. Who knows? I think it's an honest photograph, if I can use that,
Mm-hmm.
but it certainly doesn't affect what I'm going to post in the future.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I
Not in that way. I mean, the catharsis of posting it, that may affect what I do. I've got a couple ideas for some other self-portraits that I would like to do, but those are not for an audience per se. They're all about addressing and maybe taking steps to overcome some of the insecurities I have about my own appearance.
Do you think some of the response was just because it's so different than what you've done in the past?
Maybe, yeah. I mean, who knows? Look, regardless, I'm grateful that for whatever reason, someone felt moved, connected, whatever they felt, enough to, tap the button. Because I hope it was the kind of photograph. I feel like I am more grateful for the likes on that picture than I am or would be on a street photo or a landscape or a good picture, for lack of a better word. Because I think people were responding to the content, not the technique. They were responding to the intent, to the purpose, to the intention that I was trying to convey, not necessarily the composition, the lighting, the subject matter, and from a technical perspective.
Okay, that actually makes a lot of sense.
At least I hope that's the case. I mean, maybe some people really liked it as a black and white photograph. I don't know. But what that tells me is that intent and purpose have value. And they have a value that goes beyond whether or not a photo is technically superior, or whether or not, you shot it at the right ISO or the right f-stop, or whether or not there's fantastic bokeh, or all of those things that we sometimes get hung up on. I don't know that it matters whether or not those things were present, that the photo would have garnered a different response. I think people were responding to, again, the purpose or intent of the photo, not necessarily the photograph itself.
Mm-hmm. And that sort of, if you want to say, speaks to why you take pictures to begin with. It's sort of back to the whole point of, you're in the business of connecting with people.
Mm-hmm. I'm trying to be.
Yeah. And so that you appreciate when people are connecting to you in the self-portrait type manner.
Right.
You become the interest of your own connection. Like, you become the subject,
mm-hmm.
which is partly why you probably get very uncomfortable with that type of scenario.
Yeah, it is very, very uncomfortable. But the ideas that I have for future self-portraits push my degree of discomfort even further. They're more personal, or more I don't want to say revealing, because that sounds kind of, that's not the word I'm going for, but you just get to see other sides that I'm hoping will act as a therapy of sorts to get over some of the feelings that I have. And I think that sharing them is just as much about sharing what's behind them as it is sharing the photograph itself.
Yeah.
I know that made sense in my head. I don't know if it made sense coming out.
No, I think it did.
And I think I feel the same, or not the same, but similarly about the paintings. I don't think I'm a particularly good painter. I think my paintings are more design than painterly. I think they, especially the recent stuff, it really does err more on the side of messy graphic design,
Yeah.
And that comes out of two things. It comes out of, my love of graphic design and my love of strong shapes and colors, and my lack of ability as a figurative painter. I just don't have the chops to paint, portraits or nudes or figures, especially in sort of a realistic way. I mean, you look at the work of somebody like Tim Okamura, who is phenomenal, or, Connor Harrington, who is phenomenal as a draftsman, but also has that designy, graphic-y, cinematic quality to his work. And at the moment, that's just not in my wheelhouse. So I do what I do. I still put the intent and the purpose behind it, hoping that comes through. But I don't know that anybody is looking at my paintings going, wow, what an incredible painter. What wonderful technique, because that's not what the pieces are about.
Yeah, but I as someone whose skill with a paintbrush is extremely minimal, what you do is impressive.
Oh, thank you.
It's different than like those people who paint like scenes and you're like that look like photographs and it blows everyone's minds. Yeah, what you do is different.
Mm-hmm.
But just because it's different in that manner doesn't make it less impressive. If that makes sense.
No, it does make sense, but that's the big stumbling block, isn't it? And we all do it, whether we're painters or writers or photographers, or podcasters. Aaron Mahnke, is that how you pronounce his last name? The guy that did Lore?
Yeah, I think so.
He posted this 5-part tweet the other day talking about how 4 years ago he posted the first episode of Lore and 9 people downloaded it, and now 4 years later, it's a podcast, it's a TV show, it's a series of books, and they're at 250 million downloads. And there are a couple different ways you can look at it. You can look at that as wildly inspiring and go, oh my gosh, he did that only 4 years ago. I can do that too. But you and I both know that's not me.
Yeah.
I read that and go, I've been at this for a decade and I'm nowhere near that.
Yeah.
So what am I doing?
Yeah. But it's funny, the more, I don't know how much I've listened to, I don't even want to know how many podcast episodes, and I've done, probably done my own and been a guest on probably nearing 60, 70 podcast episodes.
Sure.
And it's funny when I hear people who haven't figured out how to do it, because it's funny, podcasting is not like a regular interview. It takes time to be able to verbally dance with people.
Mm-hmm.
I forget that it's a skill and it's a craft that has to be learned. And I'll hear these conversations and you're like, why didn't they ask that question?
Right.
That obvious
that all
question
the time.
was just dangling. Like, it's one of those where they're like, they leave this juicy hanging,
right,
question out there, and then they're like, so what's your inspirations? And you're like, no,
come on, it's right there. Or there'll be some sort of answer, and rather than going deeper in that answer, okay, next question. You can just hear it in their minds that they're just moving on to the next thing, and you go, no.
Yeah. Or you'll get this on certain guests who are like, these are my talking points,
right? And
we wanna go in this nice linear fashion, and I'll say my points, and I get to go home.
Yeah,
it's like, no.
I will say there are a lot of great shows out there. There really are, and I think I am very proud to be a part of of that community and have even my own little corner of that pie, that my own little piece of that pie. I have to check myself and go, yeah, I could do a different kind of show that probably would have a broader appeal or tap into a different market segment. But I keep coming back to who and where I am. I keep coming back to, the stories that I want to tell and could I expand on it and go out of talking to just quote unquote creatives and go into absolutely, absolutely. Like one of the ideas that has been floated to me and that I've been talking about is to do something like a Humans of New York, but an audio version where you're talking to just everyday people, like the work that Studs did with Working, where you're just talking to plumbers and bricklayers and baristas and just people trying to figure out their lives and what they bring to their work, what they get from their work, how does family play into it? The whole thing is about just hearing and being heard.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what gives me such a charge,
Yeah, it's, because the one day when I think we were going to we went and saw the Sally Mann exhibit.
Oh, yeah.
We stopped by the post office, and you're like, my man's behind the counter, and you started chit-chat, like talking to him, and you're like, it was like you picked up a conversation midstream.
Yeah.
With this guy.
Yeah.
And not many people have that type of interactions, particularly with people in the service industry, as someone who's often on the other side of that equation.
But everybody has something interesting about them. That's the thing.
Oh, 100%.
I want to carry a mic with me all the time, and I don't. I keep saying I'm going to, and I don't. I sometimes do, but not often enough. And those moments, how many times have you and I been talking about something, and we're like, why weren't we recording this? I mean, it happens all the time with just people that I happen to come across. And I think that for me, what do you want to do versus what should you do? At least with regard to podcasting, they're one and the same. I want to talk to more people, and I should talk to more people. Like those two things are one and the same. And in those two things, a different audience will be reached.
Yeah.
And it doesn't matter whether it's bigger or smaller. That the numbers are important to advertisers, but they're not necessarily important to creating a thriving community or tribe. I would rather have the audience that I have who are very engaging, and I get emails and messages and I love it and I appreciate it. I would rather have that than feel like I'm talking to 100,000 people completely anonymously, but it allows me to do Squarespace and stamps.com ads.
Yeah.
That doesn't hold much interest to me.
Yeah. But I think like you're one of those people, like, and this is partially what I got out of your response to sort of the Patreon idea was that you have an idea of who you are and what you want to do and create, and you're going to go through with that, as opposed to picking what's that, like doing something to get some other byproduct. Like, you're not going to create a show just to sell ads.
No. I mean, there are a few, there are certain products, services, companies that I would love to be aligned with, that I would love to support and spread the word about. And a couple of those, we had on OTP. I mean, off the top of my head, Masterclass. I love their classes. I think they're really well done. Some of them are better than others, but the production value is consistent. I think the pricing is very fair. I would love to be involved with them. And maybe it's just a matter of making the ask. I know you're not going to give me the CPM of, Marin or Rogan, but what about X and an all access pass? And I'll give you, 4 spots a month or whatever it is.
Yeah.
And approach the people that I believe in and go, look, this is not an enormous community, but it is a purposeful community. It is an engaged community. And maybe that's worth something to you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the whole Patreon thing is just, I don't even want to talk about it. It's just, I think I've covered that.
Yeah, I kicked that hornet's nest quite nicely.
Yeah, what did you tell? You tweeted me the good John giveth and the good John taketh away.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, it's an interesting question, though. I mean, the work you want to create, first of all, you have to define what that is. Mm-hmm. And photographically, for me, I don't know what that is. I don't know. That was part of the whole, camera saga. It's like, who's going to show up to use this thing?
Mm-hmm.
Because you could argue, well, maybe you couldn't, but I sure did. There were 2 different use cases for the pieces of hardware. There were 2 different sort of purposes that you would choose one over the other, and that was at the core of it. Is what do I want to make?
Mm-hmm.
And I think even with regard to the paintings, I've already made more paintings this year than I did all of last year.
Yeah,
I think I've made double or triple the number of paintings that I've made, so far as of, what is it, March? So in the first, not even the end of the first quarter, I've already, well surpassed what I did all of last year. And I haven't sold them. They're not moving, but there are a whole host of things behind that. You have to actually tell people you have them. That's
when we argue that you need to be able to you need to sell them to be able to move.
Right. So, but even getting to that point where you're okay just with the making, I know a lot of people out there struggle with the making. A lot of people that listen to the shows have written to me and talked about finding that drive to get out and make. And I struggle with it too. But at the end of the day, you've got to find your own why. And this is fun because it has inspired me to start asking people in no uncertain terms, why do you do X? Because we've talked about the what, we've talked about, the how. Let's not dance around this. Why do you do this? And I think that's going to be a fascinating series of answers. There are a couple that I've gotten so far, and I'm going back to sort of re-ask some questions and then reach out to people I haven't spoken to yet and ask the same question. And I think getting to the core of why will be very interesting.
Yeah. I mean, that is that becomes the root cause of everything else. That everything that drives from there on out.
Mm-hmm.
It's the first mover.
Yeah.
In terms of that,
I wonder what's easier to answer: why you don't do something or why you do it.
Probably why you don't do it.
Yeah,
because that seems to be a more conscious decision. I could definitely answer why I don't do something a lot easier than why I do something, other than maybe pick up like dirty clothes or something, like a dirty.
Why don't you do this? Yeah,
that sort of stuff. But like, it's real easy to explain why I shoot film over digital, or or why I don't do fill in the blank.
Right.
But like why I do something, like sometimes it's just because you thought it was a good idea.
Right.
Like something as silly as that.
Right. To see what would happen.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
I mean, I know that's at least part of why you built that giant camera.
Oh yeah.
Because you couldn't know what the outcome would be.
Yeah.
So there had to be something else driving that.
Yeah. I did that to see if I could do it.
To see if it could be done, sure.
And you learn so much in that pursuit of doing something that everything in certain other things become easier and spark other things, and it just it becomes that creative snowball that careens down and maybe takes out a village or two.
Has that always been the case for you in terms of you look at the road to the destination, not the destination, or not the destination at the beginning?
Yeah, I find that I'm really bad at, like, what's your 5-year plan and like all that stuff. I'm far easier, like, what's the thing directly in front of your face that you're doing, and then you just repeat that. After you get done that, what's the thing that sparked?
Right.
I'm good at following rabbit holes.
Yeah.
Or rabbits down holes. I forget how you would phrase that, but like, I'm really good at that. I'm not good at being like, execute on this plan that will get you famous.
Yeah, I missed that memo myself.
I'm real bad at that.
Yeah. There's an interesting interview. I'll have to see if I can find it. I'll send it to you, with Brian Eno. And he's talking about creativity and making, and how he says he's only ever had one idea his whole life, and he's just been doing it 100 ways ever since.
Yeah. And this may be a topic for another episode, but I've heard someone basically state that the art you create is basically your idea of what the first art you saw or resonated with. Like, it like basically younger you got imprinted with an idea of what art is, that older you just begins chasing.
Gosh, that's the first art exhibit, or the first museum I remember going to, the first thing I ever remember seeing at a museum was the touring show for Tutankhamun.
Oh, nice.
At the LA Museum of Art. We did a school field trip there. That's the first thing that I remember. First time I remember going to a museum and seeing something beautiful that had value. That concept was very strange. We had to like walk with our hands together, like clasped, so we wouldn't touch anything.
Yeah. You don't want to be like that guy in Philadelphia that sat on the Ming Dynasty chair and broke it.
No.
Real story.
Yeah. Or the let's see, what would I have been? The sophomore version of me who in chemistry decided to turn the little knob on the barometer and mercury went all over the floor.
Good times.
Yeah. Never seen the chemistry professor move so fast. He jumped up and grabbed me by the scruff. Hey, you! Yeah. Hauled me down to the principal's office.
Wow. Unfortunately, I need to go pick up Miles here.
Yeah, no, this is good. I think there are some definite opportunities to go a little deeper into this, but I think this kind of whets the appetite for where it can go. Yeah. Subscribe to Jeffrey Sidoris Everything in your favorite podcast app to get every in-between, every iteration, every process driven, as well as special one-off conversations all in one feed. You can connect with me on Instagram and Twitter at Jeffrey Sidoris. That's JeffreySaddoris, or on my website at jeffreysidoris.com. You can find Jon on Instagram at Jon Wilkening. That's JonWilkening, or by visiting his website at jonwilkening.com. Thanks very much for being here. I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll talk to you on the next one.